The boiler came on at 11:47 every night. Not 11:45, not midnight. 11:47, like something in the basement had a watch and kept perfect time. That was the first thing I noticed about Aldenmore, before I noticed anything else worth noticing. Before the sounds in the east corridor, before the name carved into the wood behind the third-floor radiator, before I understood what the rules were actually for. I want to be clear about something up front, because people always want to jump to the part where things go wrong. And I think that's the wrong way to tell this story. Things going wrong is easy to describe. Things being almost right, things being nearly normal in a way that makes your teeth ache, that's harder to put into words, and that's what Aldenmore actually was. So let me start at the beginning. Let me start with why I was there at all. My name is Gerald Foss. I'm 53 years old. I have a bad knee from a loading dock accident in 2019 that cost me a job at a distribution center in Burlington, a settlement that ran out faster than my lawyer said it would, and an ex-wife in Montpelier who doesn't answer calls but does occasionally cash checks if I send them for the kids. The kids are 19 and 22 now, which means they're old enough to have opinions about me and young enough that those opinions are still mostly my ex-wife's. That's just how it is. I'm not telling you that for sympathy. I'm telling you because it explains why, in October of 2024, I answered a job posting on a local Facebook group that I'd normally have scrolled right past. The posting was short, almost too short for what it was offering. It read, "Night custodian needed for seasonal facility maintenance, Aldenmore School, Hartley Township. October through April, must be reliable. Modest weekly rate plus full residency. References preferred but not required. Contact Raymond Veach." Full residency. That was the phrase that stopped my thumb. I'd been renting a room from a woman in Waterbury for 4 months, and she just told me her daughter was moving back from Portland and she'd need the room by November 1st. So full residency, meaning a place to sleep, a roof, heat, was not a small thing. Not in Vermont in October, when the nights start dropping into the 30s and the heating bills start looking like car payments. I called Raymond Veach the same afternoon. He picked up on the second ring, which surprised me. People posting on local groups usually take 2 days to answer, if they answer at all. His voice was careful, not unfriendly, but measured, like he was reading from something he'd rehearsed slightly. He told me Aldenmore School was a former private boarding school in Hartley Township, about 22 miles northeast of Morrisville. It had been closed since 2011. He represented a property management firm called Cartwell Holdings, which had been retained by the school's estate to maintain the building through winter in advance of a potential sale in spring. "What does maintenance mean exactly?" I asked. "Walkthroughs," he said. "Checking for water intrusion, drafts, evidence of animal entry, running the boiler on schedule, keeping the interior clean enough that prospective buyers can tour without issue. Basic documentation." "Clean," I said. "Like how dirty are we talking?" "It's been vacant 13 years, he said. "It's not in terrible shape. The structure is sound. But there's a baseline of dust and debris accumulation that will need weekly attention, and the administration building in particular should be kept presentable." The pay wasn't going to make anyone's eyes water, but it came with the residency, an apartment in what used to be the groundskeeper's cottage, attached to the main building by a covered walkway, and that made the math work in a way very little else in my life did at that moment. I said yes. He said he'd mail me a packet. The packet arrived 3 days later. I want to describe the drive to Aldenmore before I describe the school itself, because the approach matters. You don't just arrive at a place like that. You're gradually prepared for it by the landscape, whether you're paying attention or not. Route 12 north of Morrisville is fine. Normal Vermont road farms, silos, a couple of churches with the kind of signboards that have been half collapsed since the 90s and never quite get fixed. Then you turn off onto County Road 7 and it changes. The farmland gets less tended, the houses come farther apart, there are more trailers, more overgrown driveways, more evidence of things that used to be there and aren't anymore. Then you turn off County Road 7 onto a dirt track that isn't named on most maps. It appears on Google as a thin gray line with no label, and you drive through about 1.5 miles of second growth, forest, birch, and beech trees, pressing close on both sides, and then the tree line opens up and there it is. Aldenmore. It's bigger than you expect. That's the first thing. It reads as a campus, not a building, a main hall with a central tower. 3 satellite buildings connected by covered walkways that radiate out like fingers. All of it built from the same dark Vermont granite that looks wet even when it isn't. The grounds had gone to meadow. The old playing fields now chest high in goldenrod and Queen Anne's lace, browned out by October into something that looked like straw. There was a gate that wasn't locked, just latched, and a gravel circle in front of the main entrance where I pulled my truck in and sat for a minute before getting out. Raymond Veach had said he'd meet me there in person the first day to walk me through the building and go over procedures. He was already waiting by the front door when I arrived. He was older than his voice suggested, probably late 60s, thin, in a good wool coat that was 2 or 3 decades out of style. He shook my hand firmly, asked if the drive had been all right, and then wasted no time. "I want to go over the maintenance protocols before we go inside," he said. "I prefer to do it out here." That phrasing struck me as odd, but I let it go. He handed me a laminated card from his coat pocket. It was printed in a clear, plain font. 12 items listed with numbers. Not a lot of explanation around each one, just the rule itself, stated flatly. "Read it when you get a chance," he said. "We'll talk through the important ones as we walk." This is what was on that card. Rule 1. Night custodian hours are 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Do not begin work before 10. Do not remain inside after 6. Rule 2. Begin each shift in the administration building. Sign the log on the front desk. Do not skip this step. Rule 3. Walk the building in the order marked on the map. Do not deviate from the sequence. Rule 4. The east corridor on the 3rd floor is structurally unstable. Do not enter under any circumstances. Rule 5. If you hear movement in a room, before you open the door, do not open the door. Mark it on the map and continue your route. Rule 6. The boiler runs on an automatic timer. Do not adjust the timer. Do not turn the boiler off manually. Rule 7. Some of the corridor mirrors are original to the building. Do not move or remove them. Rule 8. There is a room on the 2nd floor marked with a yellow X on your map. Do not clean this room. Leave whatever you find there undisturbed. Rule 9. If you are in the building and the external temperature drops below 28 degrees, return to the cottage immediately. Do not wait. I read the card, standing in the gravel circle. Veach watched me read it. The structural one is self-explanatory, he said when I looked up. The east corridor on 3 has subfloor rot. The insurance situation is not something we want to complicate. And the yellow room? I asked. Previous occupants stored personal items there. The estate is still in the process of determining what to do with them. In the meantime, leave it alone. What previous occupant? He looked at me with an expression that wasn't evasive so much as tired, like this was a question he'd already answered several times in his own head and hadn't liked any of the answers. The school had a headmaster. Through its last decade of operation, he said. He lived on the premises. When the school closed, the situation with his belongings was complicated. Complicated how? The estate is in probate, he said. That's all I can tell you. He said it in a way that indicated that was also all he wanted to tell me. We went inside. 13 years of vacancy does something to a building that you can smell before you can see. It's not rot exactly. It's more like the air has gone still in a way that air isn't supposed to be still, like the building has been breathing only for itself, cycling the same cubic footage of oxygen over and over. And now that you've opened the door, you've introduced a foreign element, your own breath, your own warmth, the smell of your jacket and your coffee thermos, all of it suddenly conspicuous. Like you've walked into a room where everyone stopped talking. Veach walked me through the building in the prescribed sequence. Administration wing first, a high-ceilinged entry hall, a front desk with an actual leather-bound logbook still sitting on it. A corridor of administrative offices with their frosted glass doors all standing open. Then south wing classrooms, a library, a room that had been a music room with a piano still in it. The keys gone the color of old bone. Then north wing, the dining hall, the kitchen storage. Then the second floor, which was dormitory rooms on both sides of a long hallway. Every door standing slightly open in that way that's hard to explain but deeply wrong. Like each room had just exhaled. He showed me the yellow X room. It was about halfway down the second floor dormitory corridor. The X was actually tape yellow electrical tape applied to the door in an X pattern, nothing written on it. The door was closed. All the other doors were open. That one was closed. I didn't ask again. He didn't offer. We went up to 3, but only to the landing. He showed me where the east corridor branched off. There was a saw house blocking it and a paper sign on the wall that said, "Danger structural instability, no entry." And he pointed down the main corridor, which ran west, and said that was fine to use for walkthroughs. I could see down it clearly. Dormitory room, same as below. The mirror he'd mentioned, one large framed mirror at the far end of the corridor, oval, dark framed, mounted on the wall where the corridor terminated. I could see myself in it from the landing, small, far away, flanked by a row of half-open doors. The mirrors are original? I asked. Most of them. There are 3 in the building. Don't ask me to explain the rule about not moving them. It's been in the property protocols since before Cartwell took on the account, and I was told to pass it along as written. Before Cartwell took it on, I said. So who wrote the protocols originally? He looked at me again with that same tired look. The headmaster, he said. He left me with a set of keys, a kerosene lantern for emergencies, a first aid kit, and a thermos of coffee that his wife had apparently packed, which I thought was either sweet or deeply unsettling given the context. He said he'd check in by phone every 2 weeks and to call if anything came up. I moved into the cottage that evening, started my first shift at 10 p.m. The first 3 weeks were fine. I want to say that clearly because I think in a story like this, you expect the wrongness to start immediately, and it didn't. The first 3 weeks were cold and quiet and tedious in the way that night work is always tedious. The same hallways, the same dust, the same sounds the building made, as the temperature outside dropped and the old granite settled and contracted. I swept, I mopped. I documented water stains and animal evidence in the log. I signed the log on the front desk every night at 10:02 or 10:03 because I was punctual and the walk from the cottage took about 3 minutes. I walked the route in order. I did not enter the east corridor. I did not touch the yellow X room. I did not adjust the boiler. The boiler came on at 11:47 every night. I confirmed this the second night, standing in the basement with my watch just to see. I wasn't spooked by it at that point. I thought it was just a precisely programmed thermostat, something Veach's firm had set up. But on the 23rd night, I came back to the cottage at the end of my shift and looked at the boiler records I'd been keeping in a composition notebook. I always kept notes, old habit from the distribution center job where documentation was everything, and I realized the boiler had been coming on at 11:47 every night for 23 nights without a single variation. Not 11:46, not 11:48, 11:47, every time. I looked up the school's history that evening before my shift. There wasn't much online. Aldenmore School for Boys, founded 1923, a small private boarding school for students in grades 6 through 12. It had never been large. The maximum enrollment appeared to be around 80 students at its peak in the 50s, dropping steadily through the following decades. It closed in 2011. There was a local newspaper archive, the Lamoille County Courier, that had a digitized index, but most of the actual articles were paywalled. I could see the headlines, though. From 2011, 3 that caught my eye. Aldenmore School closes. After 88 years, questions remain in Aldenmore. Incident headmaster, Everett Finch, unavailable for comment. I paid for a 1-month archive subscription. $7 I didn't really have. I read for 2 hours before my shift. Everett Finch had been headmaster of Aldenmore School since 1987. By all accounts, he'd been, for most of that tenure, a reasonably well-regarded administrator in the small, inward-looking world of small Vermont private schools. The school had financial troubles through the 2000s, enrollment declining, maintenance deferred. By 2009, there were only 31 students enrolled. In February 2010, 3 students reported to a local pastor that they had been kept in an unused room on the 2nd floor of the dormitory building overnight, as punishment for an unspecified rules violation. They described the room as wrong. One of the students, a 15-year-old, apparently used the word wrong 4 times in his account and couldn't be more specific than that. The pastor reported it to the state. The state investigated. The investigation found insufficient evidence to pursue any charge, but the Department of Education opened a separate inquiry into Finch's administrative practices. Finch cooperated with the inquiry. No criminal charges were ever filed. The school closed in June 2011, citing insurmountable financial pressures. Everett Finch died in August 2011, approximately 7 weeks after the school closed. The Courier described it as a death from natural causes, no other details. He had no surviving family. His estate, including whatever he had left behind in the building, passed to a distant relative out of state who apparently had no interest in the property and had simply left everything with the building when they transferred ownership to a trust, the trust that had eventually engaged Cartwell Holdings, the room on the 2nd floor, the room with the yellow X on the door. I sat with that for a while. Then I went to work. Here's the thing about rules that I don't think people fully appreciate. until they've spent time in a place like Aldenmore. Rules become personal. They start as external impositions, things someone else decided before you arrived, handed to you on a laminated card, and over time, through nothing more than repetition, they become yours. Not your beliefs, exactly, more like your habits. Your body starts to enact them before your mind finishes considering them. You find yourself checking the log before you've consciously decided to, your hand reaching for the pen automatically, your feet already turning toward the start of the prescribed route. That's not sinister on its own. That's just how human beings work. We're pattern-following animals. We always have been. But there's a risk in that. When you're following patterns automatically, you stop noticing when something small about the pattern has changed. You stop noticing the difference between the way a door usually sits and the way it sits tonight. You stop hearing the difference between the sounds the building always makes and the sounds the building is making now. I almost missed it, is what I'm saying. It was night Noe 31. I was on the 3rd floor, main corridor, doing my walkthrough. I had my flashlight and my mop cart, the rubber wheels squeaking slightly on the old hardwood floor. I was moving toward the mirror. At the end of the corridor, my habit was to walk all the way to the mirror, check the rooms on both sides as I went, then turn around. The mirror was my turnaround point. I'd done it 30 times without thinking about it. That night, I was about 20 feet from the mirror when I stopped. There was a child standing in it. I want to be careful here. I want to be very specific because the details matter and because I've gone over this so many times that I know exactly what I saw, and I'm not going to embellish it or soften it. In the mirror, in the reflection of the corridor behind me, there was a child standing about 10 feet back from where I was. A boy, I thought. Small, young, maybe 10 or 11. He was wearing what looked like dark trousers and a white shirt with a collar, which I clocked as old-fashioned even in the moment. Some part of my brain identifying it even as the rest of my brain was doing something different and much louder. He was standing completely still. His hands were at his sides. I turned around. The corridor was empty. I turned back to the mirror. The corridor behind me in the reflection was empty too. I stood there for probably 15 seconds, which is a long time when you're doing it in a dark hallway with a flashlight. My heart was going. My knee, which always aches in the cold, was suddenly throbbing. I was aware of every door standing slightly open on both sides of me. Then I turned my cart around and went back to the stairwell and went downstairs and finished the rest of my route without incident. I wrote no anomalies. 3rd floor west in the log. Then I sat down at the front desk for a minute and looked at the laminated card. Rule 7. Some of the corridor mirrors are original to the building. Do not move or remove them. I read it twice. The rule was about not moving them, not about not looking in them, not about what you might see. I thought about that for a long time. I called Raymond Veach the next afternoon. He answered on the second ring again. I told him I had some questions about the history of the property. He was quiet for a moment. What kind of questions? About Everett Finch, I said. Another moment of quiet. Longer. What specifically? There were students who said they were kept in a room overnight, I said. The room on the 2nd floor, the one with the yellow X. That was investigated and found to be... I know what it was found to be, I said. That's not my question. My question is what Finch was actually doing in there. Because I've read enough about him to know the investigation found insufficient evidence, which isn't the same as nothing happened. Silence. Mr. Foss, he said finally, I want to be direct with you. There are aspects of the property's history that are legally complex and that Cartwell Holdings is not in a position to discuss. What I can tell you is that the protocols I gave you were prepared by Finch himself. I was told this when we took on the account, and that they have been followed by every maintenance person we've placed at this property since 2012. There have been others? Yes. How many? He said nothing. Raymond. How many? 4, he said, before you. And they left because they each chose to terminate their contracts early, he said, for personal reasons. I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics. Were they given the same card? Yes. Did Finch make these rules for maintenance people, or did he make them for something else? I heard him exhale. It was a long, slow exhale. The kind that means someone is deciding how much of a true thing to say. The protocols were found with his personal papers, Veach said. After his death? They were not addressed to anyone specifically. Cartwell adapted them for maintenance use because they contained useful information about the building. Adapted? I said. The original document had more items on it. How many more? I don't know the exact. Raymond. 17, he said. The original had 17 items. We used 9. I let that sit in the air between us for a second. What were the other 8? I asked. He hung up. I should have left. I know that. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I was trapped by circumstance or that I had no choice. I had choices, the same choices I always have, which are bad and worst, and I picked bad like I always do. I stayed because I needed the residency. I stayed because it was November, and I had nowhere else to go. I stayed because something in me, the part that spent 3 years documenting things at a loading dock and got very good at understanding systems by watching them, wanted to understand this one. Those are reasons. They're not excuses. But they're what I had. That night I started paying different attention to the building and not violating rules. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't going rogue, wasn't opening doors I wasn't supposed to open. I was doing my job exactly as described. But I started looking at the building the way I used to look at a new facility on my first week, not as a place to move through, but as a system to be understood. What was the logic of the route? Why this sequence and not another? Why start in administration and move south before moving north? Why was the boiler on a fixed timer that couldn't be adjusted? And why the mirrors? There were 3 mirrors in the building, as Veach had said. One on the 3rd floor west corridor, the one where I'd seen the reflection. One in the library on the 1st floor, south wing, hung above the old card catalog. One in the dining hall, north wing, a long horizontal mirror mounted along one wall the way you sometimes see in old institutional dining rooms. On my 34th night, I started mapping them. Not physically, I didn't move anything, didn't touch anything. I just stood in front of each mirror at different points in my route and noted the time. And then I realized something. The prescribed route, the sequence marked on my map, moved me past each mirror at almost exactly the same interval. Administration, then south wing with the library mirror, then north wing with the dining hall mirror, then up to 3 and the west corridor mirror. If I followed the route at a normal maintenance pace, I hit each mirror about 22 minutes apart, like clockwork, like a prescribed circuit. The route wasn't a cleaning route, it was a counting route. I sat with that discovery for 4 nights before I acted on anything, which I think is the right amount of time, long enough to be sure, short enough not to lose your nerve entirely. 4 nights of following the route exactly, hitting the mirrors, watching the intervals, thinking. On the 38th night, I did something I hadn't done since the first week. I was in the library, standing in front of the mirror above the card catalog. The library was always my favorite room in the building. High shelves, still half full of old books, a row of wooden study carrels along the windows, the kind of studious silence that feels different from ordinary silence. The mirror was old. The glass foxed and dark in the corners, the kind of antique that makes your reflection look like a photograph from another decade. I looked at my reflection for a while. I looked the way you look when you're not performing for anyone, the way you look when you're alone in a room and there's no reason to hold your face a certain way. Tired. Thick in the middle in a way I wasn't 15 years ago. Gray at the temples. Bad knee. Making my right side drop slightly when I stand still too long. And then I looked at the reflection of the room behind me. It was different. Not dramatically, not jump scare different. Subtly different in the way that makes you second guess your own memory first. The books on the shelves behind me in the reflection there were more of them. The shelves in the actual room were maybe 60% full. In the reflection, they appeared to be completely full, packed solid, the way they must have been when the school was open. The study carrels along the windows in the real room, they were empty, scarred with old graffiti, a couple of them with broken chairs pushed to one side. In the reflection, they were occupied. That's the word I keep coming back to. Occupied. There were boys at the carrels. 5 of them, I counted, hunched over books, doing exactly what boys at study carrels do, reading, writing, not looking up. They were wearing the same old-fashioned clothes as the one I'd seen on the 3rd floor. White-collar shirts, dark trousers, school uniforms. They were not looking at me. And the room in the reflection had light, warm light, lamplight. The kind of light that old buildings used to have before fluorescent tubes made everything cold. The library in the reflection was not abandoned. It was in use, fully and naturally in use, a functional room full of working students at 10:15 on a weeknight. I stood there a long time, long enough that I was going to be late to the dining hall mirror by my self-imposed schedule. None of the boys in the reflection looked up. I moved on. When I was a kid, maybe 8 or 9, my grandmother took me to see a woman in our town who read playing cards, not tarot regular playing cards, a worn-out deck of bicycles that she'd been using so long the faces were soft and featureless. My grandmother was deeply pragmatic in every other aspect of her life, and I never understood why she took the card reader seriously. But she did. She'd ask questions, and the card reader would put cards down on the table and speak carefully about what she saw. And my grandmother would listen with her whole body, the way she listened to almost nothing else. On the drive home, I asked my grandmother what the card reader did, and she said, "She sees what's already there." I said, "What do you mean already there?" "She sees what happened and what's happening and what's going to happen," my grandmother said. "But she doesn't see it as separate things. She sees it all at once, like—" She paused, and the pause was my grandmother thinking, which was always worth waiting for. "Like if you could look at a river from far enough above it that you could see where it came from and where it was going to at the same time." I didn't understand what she meant when I was 8. I thought I understood it now. The mirrors at Aldenmore showed you what was already there, what had always been there. The school as it had existed not as a memory, not as a haunt, but as a permanent fact about that place, a stratum of time pressed into the glass and still visible if the light hit it right, or if you stood at the right angle, or if you'd been brought to the right spot at the right interval. That was what the route was for. The sequence, the timing, the 9 rules were an instrument. A way of positioning one person, a person who had no reason to be afraid, who was just doing a job, who was moving through the building with a mop cart at a consistent pace, at each mirror at intervals calibrated to whatever made the mirrors readable. Finch had written 17 rules. Cartwell had given me 9. The 9 were enough to make the instrument work. I didn't know yet what it was reading, I broke Rule 5 on night 44. I'm not proud of it. I'm also not going to apologize for it, because the rule says, if you hear movement in a room before you open the door, do not open the door. And I heard movement in the room at the end of the second-floor dormitory corridor. The room directly past the yellow X room, 2 doors down, and I stood at the door for 20 seconds, doing exactly what the rule says, and then I thought about the 4 people who had taken this job before me and terminated their contracts early and never explained why, and I thought, I am 53 years old, and I have lost more than I had planned to lose, and if I leave this job without understanding what I just saw in that library mirror, I will spend the rest of my life in a room in Waterbury wondering. I opened the door. It was a dormitory room. 4 beds, 2 on each side, metal frames, the old striped mattresses rolled up and stacked at the ends the way dormitory rooms always look when a school closes, like the school had been systematically wound down, put away, packed in. The room smelled of dust and cold and something faintly sweet that I couldn't identify. On the near bed, unrolled and lying flat, was a single mattress. On the mattress, as if they'd been placed there deliberately, was a folded wool blanket. A composition notebook very similar to the one I'd been keeping my own notes in, and a small framed photograph. The photograph was of a group of boys. School photograph, formal, the kind where everyone's arranged in rows. A placard in front of the front row read, Aldenmore School 1994 to 95. In the back row, standing slightly apart from the others, was a man in a dark suit who I took to be faculty. He was looking at the camera, but his expression was wrong. Not the forced neutrality of a person tolerating a group photo, but something more deliberate, more focused. He looked like a man who was concentrating very hard on something that wasn't in the frame. I didn't know what Everett Finch looked like. I looked him up when I got back to the cottage. The Courier Archive had one photograph from a 1999 article about a school fundraising dinner. It was him. The notebook was what stopped me cold. I took it with me. Another rule violation, I know, and read it in the cottage with my coffee. It was handwritten, dense, a crabbed, careful cursive that suggested a man who'd been educated in an earlier era when penmanship was taken seriously. It wasn't dated at the beginning. I'd say there were about 60 pages of writing, and I read all of it before my alarm went off to tell me it was time to sleep. Most of it I'm not going to tell you, partly because some of it is too specific to things I can't verify, and I don't want to misrepresent it, and partly because some of it, reading it at 4 a.m. in a cottage attached to an abandoned school in November, was the most frightening thing I've ever read in my life, and I don't want to revisit all of it in detail. But the part I'll tell you is this. Finch had understood something about Aldenmore before he ever arrived as headmaster. His first entry. I say first because it appeared to be where the notebook began, though there was no date described what he called a layering condition in the building. His theory was that Old buildings that have held the same concentrated human attention for decades develop a kind of temporal residue, not ghosts specifically, not in his framing supernatural entities in any traditional sense, something more like he used the word palimpsest 3 times. A palimpsest is a manuscript where the original writing has been scraped away and written over, but the original is still faintly visible underneath. Aldenmore was a palimpsest. Every year the school had operated had been written over the last, but the previous years hadn't gone away. They'd just been written over. And the mirrors, the original mirrors, which predated even Finch's arrival by decades, which had been in the building since it was built in 1923, the mirrors were where the layers were thinnest, where if the conditions were right, you could see through to what was underneath. Finch had been trying to read those layers for his entire tenure. The 17 rules were the instrument he'd developed to do it. 9 of them were about positioning and timing, moving a person through the building in a way that activated the mirror's readability at the right intervals. The other 8 were not given to me. The other 8 were about what to do with what you saw. I need to tell you about the yellow room now. I went in on night 49. I won't justify it beyond saying that everything I'd read in Finch's notebook had made me understand that the yellow X was not the building's most dangerous thing, but was instead the building's most concentrated thing. And at some point, those are different enough to matter. I used my master key, which opened everything. I pushed the door open and stood in the doorway. It was a room that had been used as an office, a desk, a chair, a filing cabinet, shelves built into 2 walls, a window that faced the east side of the building, the side where the structurally unstable corridor was. And on every surface in the room, the desk, the shelves, the top of the filing cabinet, the windowsill, the floor along the baseboards, there were objects, small objects, the kind of thing children leave behind. A pencil case, a compass from a geometry set, a single sneaker, a model airplane, the balsa wood kind, 1 wing broken. A folded piece of paper with a name on it. I didn't unfold it. Dozens of them, maybe 100. All small, all clearly belonging to children, all clearly old. And in the center of the room on the desk, a mirror. Small, handheld, the kind with a wooden handle, not mounted on anything. Just placed there, face up. I picked it up. I looked into it. I was looking at the room. Not a palimpsest version, not a layered version, just the room. Reflected accurately the shelves and the desk and the objects, and me standing at the desk holding the mirror. Except there was a boy standing in the doorway, behind me in the reflection. The same boy I'd seen in the west corridor mirror on night 31. Standing in the doorway, just inside the threshold, watching me. I watched him in the mirror. He raised 1 hand, not a wave. A gesture, 2 fingers extended, then folded twice, repeated a signal. I turned around. The doorway was empty. I put the mirror back down exactly where I'd found it. I left the room. I closed the door behind me. I didn't sleep. The next night, I did something I'd been thinking about since Veach had mentioned the 8 additional rules. I called him again. It was 7 in the evening before my shift. He answered. I need the other 8 rules, I said. Silence. Gerald. The 8 that were on Finch's original list, not the ones about what to avoid or where to walk or what not to touch. The 8 about what to do with what you see. We don't have them, he said. You said the original document had 17 items. We have 9. We used all 9. You're telling me someone looked at a 17-item document and just kept 9 and discarded 8? I'm telling you we have 9, he said. There was something in his voice that I hadn't heard before, which was the specific quality of a person being technically truthful. Not lying, not exactly, but not giving me the whole shape of the truth. "Did you read them?" I asked. "The 8 you didn't use?" A long pause, long enough that I thought he'd gone. "Yes," he said. And we don't have them anymore," he said. "They were considered, the legal team considered them, they thought they would create liability exposure if they were included in the maintenance protocols." Legal liability for what? For what they asked of the person performing them? I let that sit. "Veach," I said, "I've been in the yellow room." The quality of silence changed. "I've been in the West Corridor mirror and the library mirror," I said. "I've seen the boys. I've read most of Finch's notebook. I know what the 9 rules are doing, and I know they're only part of what he built. What I don't know is why he built it, not really. You said his estate went to a distant relative. What happened to his papers?" "Some of them came with the property," Veach said. "Most of them are held by the estate. The estate that's been in probate since 2011. "Yes." "That's 15 years of probate, Raymond." Silence. "Who's delaying the probate?" I asked. He didn't answer, but I heard him breathing. And his breathing had the texture of a man who knows the answer and is trying to decide whether the answer is something he can live with saying out loud. "The distant relative," I said. "Who is it?" "I can't tell you that." "Is it you?" A longer silence than any of the previous ones. Then, "Call me after your shift tonight." He hung up. I went to work. I signed the log. I walked the route. I did not deviate from the sequence. I mopped the administration hallway and dusted the window ledges in the south wing and checked the kitchen drain in the north wing for the mouse evidence that had appeared 2 weeks ago and hadn't gotten worse. I went up to 3. I stood in front of the west corridor mirror. It took longer this time. Maybe 5 minutes of just standing there, looking at my own reflection in the corridor behind me. The row of open doors on both sides. The cold dark coming in at the window at the corridor's end. And then the library, the way it always came. Gradual. First, just the sense that the reflection was slightly wrong, slightly denser, slightly more present than the real room behind me. Then the light, changing that warm lamplight. Amber, the color of a place that's still inhabited by people who don't know they've become part of a palimpsest. Then the boys at the carols. 5 of them tonight. But one was looking up. In 30-plus nights of seeing the reflections, none of them had ever looked up. They studied, they worked, they moved with the purposeful domesticity of people in their own space. None of them had looked toward the mirror. This one was looking directly at me. He was younger than the others, looked maybe 12, small for his age. He had the round face of a boy who hasn't grown into himself yet. He was holding a pencil but wasn't writing. He was looking at me, through the mirror, across whatever distance separated the layers of time the glass was holding. And he was not frightened. Not the way you'd expect. He looked like a boy who has been waiting for someone to notice him for a very long time. I said out loud in the empty library, "I see you." The warm lamplight in the reflection guttered. Just for a second, the way a candle guts when someone opens a door in another room and the air pressure changes. The boy at the carol, still looking at me, put his pencil down. Slowly, deliberately. And then he folded his hands on the desk in front of him, the way a student does when the teacher is about to speak, and he waited. I don't know what I would have said next. I'll never know. Because that was when the boiler came on. It was 11:47. And it wasn't the sound of the boiler I'd been hearing for 50 nights. It was louder, much louder. And underneath it, braided into it, was something that I can only describe accurately if you've ever heard a house make a sound at 3 in the morning that you've never heard it make before the specific frequency of something old and structural, shifting in a way it isn't supposed to. A groaning, a settling, a sigh that comes from the bones of the building itself. The reflection in the library mirror went dark. Not dark like the lights went out, dark like the layers closed, like the palimpsest sealed itself. I stood in the library for a moment with my hand on the mop cart, my heart going hard, my knee throbbing. Then I went to finish my route. At 1:23 a.m., I was on the second floor, coming back up the dormitory corridor after checking the bathroom at the south end. When I noticed that the yellow X-room's door was open, I had closed it. I remembered closing it, the click of the latch, the specific give of that door's handle, which was slightly stiff on the return. I had closed it on night 49, and every night since I'd walked past it, with my eyes forward, following the rule. It was open, not wide, about 6 inches, enough to see nothing inside but dark. And from inside came, very faintly, the sound of something being placed on a hard surface, small and deliberate. One object set down, then another with a pause between them. I stood in the corridor. I did not open the door. Rule 5. If you hear movement in a room before you open the door, do not open the door. I stood there and I did not open the door, and I said to the 6 inches of dark, I read his notebook. I know what he was trying to do. I'm not going to leave. The sound stopped. I said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with what I've seen. He didn't finish writing that part down. Or he did write it down, and it's the part no one gave me. So I need you to understand that I'm here and I'm paying attention, and I'm going to keep coming back, but I need to know what he couldn't finish. Nothing. The dark. The cold coming through the old window frame at the end of the corridor. Then slowly the door pulled itself closed from the inside. Not slamming, just drawing shut. The latch clicking softly into place. With the specific give of the handle I recognized from the nights I'd opened it myself. I finished my route. I called Raymond Veach at 6:03 in the morning, right after my shift ended. He told me what I'd already mostly figured out. Finch hadn't had children, hadn't had family worth mentioning. What he'd had was 80 years of boys coming through Aldenmore, 31 enrolled in his final year, 80 at the peak, and everything in between. He'd been headmaster for 24 years. Some of those boys, especially the ones who came in the lean years when the school was struggling and the scholarship students were harder up than the tuition-paying ones, had nowhere else to go in the way that particular kind of nowhere looks parents who were absent or unreliable, no one waiting at the end of the school year, a summer of managing on their own. Finch had noticed things in the mirrors long before he wrote the 17 rules down, had noticed them the first year he was at Aldenmore, 1987, when the school still had 60 students and was still functional, when the mirrors were just mirrors. He'd seen what I'd seen. Layers. The palimpsest. Boys still studying in the library of a year that wasn't this year. He'd spent 24 years trying to understand if what he was seeing was residue, the thermal imprint of concentrated human attention, slowly fading over time the way a photograph left in sunlight fades, or if it was something more present than that, something that still had an interiority, something that could still be reached. The 3 students who'd been kept in the yellow room, Veach confirmed it now, his voice flattened with the specific flatness of someone who has known something uncomfortable for a long time, had not been punished. Or not exactly. Finch had been conducting an experiment. He'd wanted to know if keeping a living student in the room with the hand mirror overnight would create a connection, a communication, a way through the layers. It had been a profound ethical failure, he said. The students had been frightened. The investigation had been warranted. Nothing he was going to defend, but what? I said. The students, Veach said. The 3 who reported it. They described the room differently from each other. One of them described warmth, said the room was inexplicably warm despite it being February, said he hadn't been afraid until morning when the warmth stopped. I was quiet. Finch wrote about that, Veach said, in the 8 rules we didn't give you. He believed the experiment had worked, that contact had been made, that the boys in the mirrors weren't residue. They were still there, in some functional sense, still. He stopped, gathered himself. He believed they were lonely, Veach said, and that they had been lonely since the school closed and there was no one left to pass through the building and be seen by them. And he wanted someone to keep coming, I said. A long pause. Yes, Veach said. That's what the 9 rules are for. Not to protect the maintenance person, to bring someone back every night, to give them... I stopped. To give them a witness. That was his belief, Veach said. His estate, my involvement, I was a student there. 1991 through 1994. I've always believed... He stopped again. I've believed he was right. About the mirrors, about what they showed. I took on the property management account because I needed someone reliable to be there, to keep going back. The 4 who left early, I said, they stopped going in. They were scared, Veach said. After a few weeks, they stopped following the route and then they left. And the mirrors sealed up, I said, when no one was going past them. That's what I believe, yes. I sat with that. The 8 missing rules, I said, what do they say to do? He told me. I'm not going to transcribe all 8 of them here. Partly because they're specific to Aldenmore and I don't think they'd be useful anywhere else. And partly because some of them require being in the building to make any sense at all. But I'll tell you the one that mattered most. Rule 14 on Finch's original list. If a boy in the mirror looks at you, do not look away first. Stay at the mirror until he looks away on his own. He is counting. You are the number he is counting to. That was it. That was the whole rule. I didn't understand what it meant the first time I read it. In Veach's handwriting on a sheet of paper he'd faxed to me. Yes, faxed, because the old copy shop in Morrisville still had a fax machine, which tells you something about this part of Vermont. But I understood it on the next night when I stood in front of the library mirror and the boy at the carrel looked at me again. I didn't look away. I stood there and held his gaze, or what I interpreted as his gaze, through the glass and the layers and the 80-odd years between whatever moment he existed in and this one. I held it for what my watch told me was 11 minutes, though it felt much shorter. And then he looked back down at his work and picked up his pencil and began to write. I've been at Aldenmore for 7 months now. My original contract was October through April, and it's been renewed through next October, which Veach arranged without my having to ask. The potential sale has been quietly shelved. I don't think anyone is going to buy this building, and I think the reason it keeps staying in probate is because Raymond Veach is the distant relative, and he is not, in any meaningful sense, trying to resolve the estate. I haven't told anyone about this until now. The reason I'm telling it now is because this winter was the first time in 7 months that something changed, something that I think means the work I've been doing has reached some kind of threshold, and I want someone else to know what's happening here. In February, on a night when the temperature outside dropped to 14 degrees, and I should have been in the cottage, per Rule 9, but stayed in the building because the cold had been consistent for 3 nights, and the mirrors were clearer than I'd ever seen them. I was in the library at 11:52, 5 minutes after the boiler had come on, standing in front of the mirror. Every carrel was occupied. All of them. Boys at every seat. 9 carrels, 9 boys, all of them writing or reading by that amber lamplight. And they were all looking at me. Not one at a time, all 9 simultaneously, their heads turned from their work, and their eyes on the mirror, and on me standing in front of it with my mop cart and my bad knee and my composition notebook. 9 boys. Looking at the number they'd been counting to. One of them, the small one, the 12-year-old who'd looked up first, raised his hand. Not the signal I'd seen before. Just a hand, raised the way a student raises a hand in a classroom. The way you raise your hand when you want to be called on. When you want someone to know that you know the answer. I said, I'm here. And the room in the mirror, the library, the warm lamplight, the books packed solid on the shelves, the 9 boys at the 9 carrels stayed visible for 4 hours and 17 minutes. The longest it had ever held. I timed it. I sat down on the floor in front of the mirror and watched it, and it stayed. And the boys went back to their work, and the amber light was steady and warm, and at some point around 3 in the morning I realized I wasn't cold anymore, even though it was 14 degrees outside, and the building's heating only does so much. When the image finally faded at 4:09 a.m., it didn't seal the way it usually did. It went slowly, the way a fire goes when it finally uses the last of what it had to burn, not sudden, not abrupt, but with the quality of having been sustained as long as it could be. I wrote in my notebook, "They're still counting." Then I went and finished my route. I think about what Finch wanted often. I think about whether what he did with those 3 students, keeping them overnight without consent, frightening them, using them as instruments in an experiment that served his own need to know whether that undoes everything else he built. I think about it the way you think about people who did one very bad thing inside a larger project that had genuine worth. I don't arrive at a clean answer. I don't think there is one. What I think is this: the boys in the mirrors didn't stop existing because Everett Finch failed them in his last years. Whatever they are, palimpsest, residue, something more present and more particular than either of those words fully captures they were there before his ethical failures, and they've been there since. They're not his creation. He just found them. The way you find something that's been in a drawer so long it's become invisible until the day it isn't. And they're lonely. That much I believe. I believe it the way I believe the boiler comes on at 11:47 and the temperature drops in November, and the knee is going to ache until it doesn't anymore. The rule that matters, the one I think about every night when I sign the log and start my route, is not one of the 9 on the laminated card, and it's not one of the 8 Veach gave me from Finch's notebook. It's the one I wrote myself, night 82, after the long February vigil, when I finally understood what this job actually is. If you are in the building and the mirrors are open, stay. You are not maintaining the building. You are maintaining the count. Do not make them start over. That's what I have. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing I can't fully answer, and I suspect I never will, is about the boy who first looked up. The 12-year-old. The one with the round face who waited so long for someone to notice him. I can estimate, based on the uniforms and the style of the objects in the yellow room and some of the names I found in the old administrative records that Veach sent me, I can estimate that most of what I'm seeing in the mirrors dates from the 1970s or thereabouts, some earlier, the school's mid-period, the years when it was full enough to be a real place, when the corridors had the particular energy of a building doing what it was built for. But the 12-year-old? I've looked through the records. I've cross-referenced enrollment lists with the names I could find. Most of the boys in the mirrors I can't identify, they're too far away, or the image isn't clear enough, or I just don't have the records. But one name keeps surfacing in the late period files. A scholarship student. 2008 to 2010. He would have been 12 at the school's closing. His family had no money. His mother had died the year before he enrolled. The school closed in June 2011. He would have been at that point 13. I don't know what happened to him after the school closed. I've looked. The trail is thin. An address in Burlington that the state had on file, a relative's house that the state had on file, but nothing after 2012. I'm not going to say what I think that means. I'm going to let you think about it yourself because I think you'll arrive at the same place I did, and I think it's better if you get there on your own. What I'll tell you is that when I sign the log every night at 10:02 or 10:03, I write the date and my name and the shift start time, same as always. And for the last 4 months, when I get to the library and stand in front of the mirror, the first boy to look up is always the small one with the round face. And he always looks up before I've said anything, before I've given any signal, like he heard the door open at the other end of the building and knew I was coming, like he's been listening for the sound of someone coming. I go past every mirror every night. I follow the route. I stay until they look away on their own. I don't adjust the boiler. I don't move the mirrors. I don't go into the east corridor, though on some nights I can hear, from the third floor landing, the sound of footsteps in there that move in a way that is inconsistent with an animal, but consistent with a child walking. And I stand at the landing and I say out loud to the dark and the sawhorse and the danger sign, I hear you. I'm not going anywhere. The footsteps stop when I say that. They always stop when I say that. I don't know if that means something good or something terrible or both at once. And I've made a kind of peace with not knowing. There are worse things than keeping vigil in the dark for people who need to be witnessed. There are worse jobs than being the number they count to. My knee hurts. The pay is modest. The winters here are longer than you'd believe if you weren't living them. I signed on through October. I'm going to sign on again.